They think that whatever their experience is, it applies to everyone. It's universal. People in the West, normal people in the West, have identified religion as nothing but a mechanism of control because they used it this way. With a philosophy like this, they used it this way. They used it to justify their oppression and their injustice, and to tell the common people, the people who were suffering, peasants, the peasantry, the workers, the poor, telling you just live your life in suffering, and then you'll make it to heaven. So they taught them to not rise up, to not resist, to not fight against the oppression that they were suffering, as a righteous thing to do. To be slaves, to be oppressed, that was the righteous thing to do. And the unrighteous thing to do would be if you rose up against your feudal lords, against your kings and your masters and your so on. That would be unrighteous, and that would deny you admission into heaven if you did that. So they used it as a mechanism of control, as a mechanism and an instrument of oppression, a mental tool to delegitimize resistance against oppressive power. So because they used it that way, they then decided that all religion is for that every religion does that, and every religion is only fabricated for the purpose of dominating people, for the purpose of controlling people, and for keeping people in line. They think because they did it that way, then that applies to everyone. But they couldn't be more wrong.
People will think that no religious text is authentic, just because they were exposed to fraudulent texts before, right? So
yeah, and the irony of it is that they can't even think it through to the logical conclusion when they say that, because when say atheists, or I won't say secularists, but say atheists, or people who reject religion, or people who think, okay, secularists who think division of church and state and what have you, and the reason for that is because they believe correctly that their religion has historically been used as a mechanism of control, and that it wasn't actually from God. It was man-made, and it was just a trick by the powerful to try to get the oppressed to accept their oppression, and to cover up the crimes of the rich and powerful. So they say that it was a man-made system, and that it was a man-made book, and so forth, and they're right in that. But for some reason, they think that it makes more sense, and it somehow saves them from being subject to man-made laws, man-made rules, to go now directly to rules that are openly made by men. They think that somehow that saves you from the trap, to say that we're going to dismiss religion because, in fact, our religion, our church, is man-made, and it was made by corrupt men who just wanted to control people. So now let's reject that, and we'll just go directly to the corrupt men and ask them what the rules are. That's what secularism is. And they think that saves them from what they suffered in the past. They're doing exactly the same thing that they did before, except that they're just removing the pretense of it being divinely revealed. And this is really important for us to remember as Muslims. It's very important for us to remember. And this is one of many reasons, why we cannot and we must not exclude Islamic guidance, Islamic understanding, the reference to Quran and Sunnah. We cannot remove that from our analysis of current affairs and world events, our analysis of the world. And not only is that completely abandoning one of the main purposes of the guidance that Allah sent us, which is to understand the world and how to behave in the world, but also it removes from our analysis the accurate understanding of who the kuffar are listening to, who they're guided by, because they're not following Allah's guidance. If we're following Allah's guidance, but then we're not looking and analyzing the world within the framework of Allah's guidance, then we will fail to understand who the kuffar are listening to, who they have been guided by for all these millennia, who they've been guided by. And I'm not saying that in a way to blame them. This is just the situation. If you're not following Allah's guidance, then who are you following? We know who the only option is, because you don't have any defense against the waswasa of shaitan. You have no defense against it. You have no counter argument against the waswasa of shaitan. So that's what whatever society you're talking about, that's who they've been listening to, and that's who they've been guided by. And if we fail to recognize that, then we will be ineffective at even understanding what they're doing and why, and what their motives are, and what the objectives are that they're seeking for themselves, and why they're seeking those objectives. Because they're really in a state of confusion. They're really being manipulated. They're really being exploited themselves and misled and led astray themselves by shaitan. So it's absolutely imperative for us to always understand the real world events within the context of Islamic guidance.
I just wanted to say that when we look at this mechanism of control that they have over the people, we see that the people who are perpetrating these ideas to the entire world of, especially when it comes to Christianity, saying that suffering is what leads you to redemption and everything, you see that they don't believe this for themselves. And the reason why I say that I mention this very importantly is because when we look at propaganda, as we've spoken about propaganda multiple times, we know that the people who perpetrate, the people who spread the propaganda in the first place, they don't necessarily believe what they're saying themselves. They're getting their instructions. They're getting all of this from waswasat shaitan. And we know that they would throw their own people under the bus the moment they get in any trouble. Like in the Quran, in Surah Al-Hashr, when it says كَمَثَلِ الشَّيْطَانِ إِذْ قَالَ لِلْإِنسَانِ كْفُرْ فَلَمَّا كَفَرَ قَالَ إِنِّي بَرِيءٌ مِّنْكَ إِنِّي أَخَافُ اللَّهَ رَبَّ الْعَالَمِينَ. It's very important to understand that they don't care for their own people, and they do this with the very purpose of corrupting the entire world. Like in Surah Al-Baqarah, when it said وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ لَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ قَالُوا إِنَّمَا نَحْنُ مُصْلِحُونَ أَلَا إِنَّهُمْ هُمُ الْمُفْسِدُونَ وَلَكِنْ لَا يَشْعُرُونَ. When they are told that they shouldn't be spreading corruption, they say, no, we are only peacemakers. Indeed, they are the ones who are corrupting the world. And so I think it's very important to mention that when it comes to them, evil to them is like what you're saying, submit to the evil. They don't have anything that stops them from submitting to this evil. And of course, this comes from waswas shaitan. You said that the people of the West are now completely disregarding all religions because they are seeing it as a mechanism of control. And that's why we see that Islam is on the rise and rising very quickly, because when we look at Islam, we don't just see a religion, it's a way of life, right? And so we live by our rules. We don't see it as someone who is trying to control us in any way, shape, or form, control our minds, control our bodies, control anything that we do. We see it as a way to uphold moral objectivity and the other one, which is Nahy al Munkar, which is forbidding evil. And I think it's very important to note that the people who are ruling the world with the idea that sacrificing yourself and sacrificing the innocent, because they have God complexes, like we saw with Fir'aun when he ordered the killing of Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam. He had a God complex, believing that he was more powerful than anything in the entire world. And when you see that they genuinely believe that they are untouchable by humanity, and of course untouchable by God. And what's going to happen in Al-Akhirah is, like what I said, the day of judgment, he's going to say that no, none of this was my fault, you all acted on by yourself, and he's also going to be suffering with them in hell.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also important, and again, this is another reason why it's important for us to always analyze things and understand things within the context of Islamic understanding, Islamic guidance, Quran and Sunnah. Because like what you were just talking about, it sounds like the kuffar are evil. But when they say, like for example, in the ayah, when they're spreading fasad on the earth, and you confront them about that, they'll say, we're only peacemakers. Well, they believe that. They actually think that they are. In their conception, because how shaitan gets you to do the evil is by making it seem good to you. And so if you don't have an objective standard of what goodness is, then you can convince yourself that what you're doing is good, that what you're doing is righteous, that what you're doing is justified. So when they say, no, we're only peacemakers, they mean it. They actually believe that. In their conception of what that means, they've been misled. They're very astray, that they're very confused. And they're being, like Sister said, they're following misguidance from someone who won't even reward them for following him. He'll throw them under the bus, and they'll throw each other under the bus. because they don't have any sort of a single unchanging standard of morality and goodness, because they're not following the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So whatever shaitan tells them today is good, they'll believe today it's good, and he can change it tomorrow. And then they'll think that the thing that he tells them tomorrow is good. Everyone gets a new memo of what righteousness is, of what goodness is, of what the highest principle is. Maybe the highest principle used to be, fealty to the Pope or what have you. And then it became, freedom, liberty, democracy, intersectionality, what have you. Anything that they come up with, they'll change it from day to day, from era to era, from generation to generation, the definition of what goodness is. But if you actually look, and this is why, I'll repeat, that we have to look at things from our vantage point, not from their vantage point, not the way that they define and explain their actions and their history. Because if we look at it objectively from our standpoint, they have never changed. They keep doing the same things, but they come up with all sorts of different justifications and different rationales for it, because that's what Shaitan is whispering in their ear. And they actually believe what they're doing is right. They actually believe that it's justified, because they don't have a real moral grounding. And this is the real tragedy of the so-called Western civilization. This is the real tragedy, because their own people are suffering tremendously. Their own people are in darkness and in suffering. One of the worst things about it is that they themselves can't even see it, and yet they're traumatized by it. I've talked about that many times. That you can't even find a person in the West who doesn't believe and feel that they're traumatized, even if they've had a very easy, plush, privileged life. You'll find that they're on some kind of antipsychotic medicine, antidepressants, and so on, because they're in the state of misery and feel traumatized, because they are in fact traumatized mentally, intellectually, spiritually, psychologically, emotionally traumatized, because they're wandering in darkness and constantly being told that the evil that they're doing is actually good. Well, this causes a tremendous cognitive dissonance and a rift between your own self and your fitra. And there's no way that you can be healthy like that. There's no way that you can be actually happy and content and satisfied. So they're suffering enormously by the misguidance that they're on, while continuously telling themselves and being told by Shaitan that what they're doing is good and righteous.